34 years ago, at 4:32 a.m., a powerful explosion rocked the northwestern part of Ekaterinburg. The sky lit up with a mushroom of fire. The shockwave swept through the streets, breaking glass and splitting houses. Seismologists throughout the country registered an earthquake of 8 magnitude with its epicenter in Ekaterinburg. The city's residents were sure the Americans had dropped a nuclear bomb on them. And only when it dawned, people learned that railcars at the Sverdlovsk-Sortorovakhnaya railway station had exploded. They contained almost 47 tons of TNT and 40 tons of RDX. What happened at Sverdlovsk-Sortorovakhnaya station? Sverdlovsk-Sortorovakhnaya is a railroad sorting station, the largest in the USSR. A huge transport hub, linking Europe and Asia. Here, trains are formed, locomotives are repaired, queued up, and sent on. Passenger and freight trains go here on the Trans-Siberian Railway from west to east and from east to west. The station started working in 1930 on the place of Pokino railway station, which was called Passing Track number 73 till 1917. With the years there appeared a wagon depot and an electric locomotive repair shop, and in the 1950s for the first time in the history of the Sverdlovsk Railroad a radio station started operating. On the night of Monday to Tuesday, October 4th at 3:45, the train 3091 arrived at the third track of the odd-numbered receiving section of Sverdlovsk-Sortorovakhnaya station. The first two cars contained almost 47 tons of TNT and 40 tons of hexogen cargo of the Ministry of Defense. The locomotive was disconnected from the train and started to prepare for maneuvers to form a new train. The command to debrake the train was followed to deflate the braking system in order to get the multi-ton cargo to the right track. Tatiana Kamova, duty officer, directed a shunting locomotive onto the track. It stopped nearby, but did not have enough time to hitch up to brake the arriving train. The third track was uphill and on a slope. Dozens of cars without a shunting locomotive started to slowly pick up speed. And the sixth track, which intersected with the third, was used by a transit train carrying coal through Sortovka. Tatiana Kamova could not see all the cars from her workplace and did not notice when the train without the locomotive reached the switch, approached the coal train and collided with it. The wagons collapsed on the electric pole and dropped it. Neither the brake shoes helped, nor the diesel locomotive that caught up with the train. The collision happened at about 4:30. The wires of the demolished post broke, the station was automatically cut off, and the cargo of the first car, TNT and RDX, spilled out on the ground. The explosives were transported in ordinary sacks. The current was resumed almost immediately. Sparks from the contact wire of 3000 volts hit the cars with the explosives, a fire broke out and then there was an explosion. This happened around 4:33 a.m. when the area is blown up. After an explosion of magnitude 6 to 8, a crater 40 to 50 meters in diameter and 8 meters deep was formed at the site of the accident. The shock wave from the explosion traveled 10 to 15 kilometers, and a black column of smoke was seen by the entire city. More than 1,000 people suffered from the explosion. Mostly people suffered stab wounds from broken window panes. According to the first official figures, 4 people died. Later in the hospital 2 more could not be saved. The death toll rose to 6. On the tracks themselves, several tens of locomotives and carriages were out of order, kilometers of cable lines and contact network, dozens of transformer stations were damaged. The Trans-Siberian Railway, which connected the whole country, stood, the rails were simply destroyed. The station diesel fuel depot opposite the collision point of the trains also exploded. Houses burned, tracks burned, trees burned. Around the station itself, all the nearby wooden houses were destroyed, and floor slabs and balconies of the brick buildings at Sortivka collapsed. House windows were smashed all over Sverdlovsk, at ZHBI and Viz, at the Ocean Store and at the Musical Comedy Theater on Lenin Prospect. The pipes of the Verkhisetsky plant's cooling towers, water cooling units, were pierced with shrapnel. Officially, 642 buildings with 6,000 apartments were seriously damaged, and 74 of them were demolished. The damage from the explosion was estimated at more than 300 million rubles. This is more expensive than the construction of the first line of the Sverdlovsk metro from Prospect Kosmonavtov to Chkalovskaya, which cost 250 million rubles. Sverdlovsk has never seen such a disaster. Dozens of fire trucks, ambulances, police patrols, black Volgas, armored personnel carriers, tractors, and military trucks with railroad troopers rushed into Sortitka. I loved the rescue trucks, especially the red and white fire trucks. My uncle worked in one, and of course my main dream was to sit in the cab and take a ride. The main heroes of the reconstruction work were the soldiers of the railroad troops. 4 hours after the explosion, around 9 a.m. on October 4, they restored passenger train traffic and started the even-numbered station marshalling system. It was not without difficulties. Fire trucks could not pass to the place of fire under the overpass, because it was built lower than the special vehicles were. We had to stand next to it and let the water run through the hoses. The fire was extinguished, localized, as firefighters say, only 6 hours later. And 18 hours later, traffic also opened on the odd system of Sverdlovsk-Sortorovicny station. On the second day after the explosion, the railway workers laid 8 sets of switches to control the trains. Then trenches were dug, communication cables were laid, and communications were set up. The trains kept moving, the trains ran in parallel directions. By the evening of October 7, 3 days after the explosion, the operation of the Sverdlovsk-Sortorovicny station was fully restored. Who pushed the button? The investigation spent 4 years trying to determine the cause and the perpetrators of the explosion. The investigation started in one country and ended in another. The causes of the explosion became more or less clear, but the perpetrators remain unclear. In Uralgipertrans, the Design Institute for Transport Construction, when asked why the explosion occurred, the experts gave the following answer: the reason for the freight train crash with the subsequent explosion of cars was the violation of safety rules for shunting operations, which was aggravated by the presence in the track development scheme of crossing routes for transit freight trains and overrunning of trains on the marshalling yard, as well as exceeding the admissible longitudinal gradient of the tracks in the odd-numbered receiving park. According to the official version of the investigation, the accident was entirely attributed to station dispatcher Tatiana Komova. She failed to make sure that the locomotive on the hill was holding the cars with explosives and allowed a transit train with coal to pass, which caused them to collide. The investigators did not find out why the explosion occurred after the contact wire fell. The dispatcher was accused of negligence and violation of instructions. The prosecution demanded 6 years in prison. The court returned the case for further investigation several times, and the public outcry surrounding the case was very great. Local newspapers wrote extensively about the railroad disaster, and the Sovietsky Ural newsreel published 2 documentaries about the explosion on Sortivka. Due to the increased attention, the case was sent for further investigation to the USSR General Prosecutor's Office, and then to the Chelyabinsk court. The case continued until 1992, when it was closed due to the statute of limitations. Eventually, the criminal charges against Tatiana Komova were dropped. The court found no malice in her actions. During the investigation, she stressed, "I repent, but my mistake was associated with a large workload." At the age of 35, she stopped working on the railroad and, in her words, was no longer able to fulfill herself as a professional. Now the woman lives in a small town in the Urals and devotes all her time to her family and home. Subscribe to the channel and share this video with your friends. Give it a thumbs up. Tell us interesting facts you know about the topic of this video. See you in new videos.